You're listening to The Outcue, a 21 News journalist perspective on a top news story.
I'm Assistant News Director Justin Mitchell, and this is this month's The Outcue. And this edition is going to focus on the role that you, the audience, play in helping to keep the public informed. We use sources a lot for a lot of stories, but today we're going to talk about two recently that would seem to have very little in common except for the role that somebody anonymous took to step forward and say, this is a thing I know about, that I've heard about, that the public needs to know about, and they'll never know unless I say something. So first, the first thing to know is we would never do a story only based on an anonymous source. It's just a jumping off point, but it's a really valuable jumping off point. So the stories that we're going to talk about this month are one that Kaitlyn McCarthy did last week involving Mercy Health. And that relates back to an incident last month where somebody got a hold of a gun and shot themselves inside the hospital. And some of the fallout from that has led to Mercy Health being in danger of losing its accreditation for Medicare. This is not something that Mercy Health would like to talk openly about, obviously. This is something that they would like to take care of internally and with good reason. But it also deals with public safety. And then a story that Ali Ross did regarding, I won't say holes in the children's welfare system, but gray areas in children's services and how kids are kept safe. And that came to us from a very concerned teacher who put their neck out to tell us, this is something we think you should look into, and I can't have it traced back to me. So the first thing, guys, I'd like to talk about is just, since you would never do a story just based on an anonymous source without doing all the legwork, why is it that they're still useful and valuable?
I want to start. Yeah, I'll start. Yeah, so as you mentioned, it really is a jumping point. So, I mean, first off, how would we even know about the story really, or if that it's happening without having somebody bring that out, or if it's something even that we're thinking about? How would we know, how it's affecting people? It kind of gives both of those in one when you have somebody coming out to, talk to the news station, because it just shows how important this is to the people that are out there, the people that are watching us. So I think both of those combined really make that important to have a jumping point to start the story.
Yeah, I think that's a really important piece of it, is knowing what questions even should be asked, because oftentimes you wouldn't know. We wouldn't have had any idea that the situation was going on to ask about it without that tip. And the other thing too, I think, especially in my story, is that sometimes you need a kind of humanizing and grounding force in a story. Like, we could have done, I don't know that we would have had the inspiration to do it, but we could have done a story about children's service boards and public children's service agencies in Ohio that was just all hypothetical, talking about the same things we talked about in our story: confidentiality laws, parental rights laws, and how they impact the experience for people who are making referrals. But without a person to talk about their experience in that system, how they felt when they were making a referral, there would have been kind of a missing why to the piece. It just would have felt a little intangible. And so I think that, having somebody who's willing to share their experience, even anonymously, can make a story more clearly, I guess, reflect that it's something that's actually happening in the community that people care about.
And there's an important distinction also between when we use anonymous sources versus just having to get it from sources who do put their names out there. So Kaitlyn, for instance, with Mercy Health, the day that shooting happened, Mercy Health never acknowledged what was going on inside their hospital, other than they'd had an incident and their thoughts were with the family of the person involved. But they never said what the incident was. I mean, they were very, very close to the vest. In fact, they declined to even release the incident report, saying that they take the position that their police department is not a public entity and they're not subject to public records laws. Our position is to take exception to that because they are certified through Ohio police training and they do have arresting powers, but that's unsettled. So we don't have that police report. But we had named sources, namely Ken Joseph, the CEO of EMT, and more directly, Barry Finley, the fire chief of Youngstown, saying what they were responding to. That's different than when we talk about anonymous sources, which you do hear disparaged sometimes, particularly in national media. Well, if that story is real, then why can't we know who the sources are? But that's where it gets tricky. A good anonymous source has inside information, and they have skin in the game, and they could step out and say what their name is, but they may give up their livelihoods to do so. That's why they're protected. So, Kaitlyn, you were not, in the case of the Mercy Health story, you never spoke directly to the anonymous source on that. And this was not, anybody that I can obviously say who they were, but they were not even somebody in this area. I can tell you that. This was somebody who was aware of our work and gave us some documents from CMS. But we had to then take that, and how does it go in your case from, hey, we're hearing that Mercy could be in some trouble here, to being able to put that on the air? Because it's a big leap.
Yeah, we get this tip. We get, as much information as we can from the tipster. And then once we go there, we have to verify every single thing that's being said. You can't just put it on air hearing from what just one person's saying, because, you don't know their motives. You don't know why, you don't know a lot of information about that.
Even with documents.
Even with documents,
Yes.
You don't know. Those could be fake.
Right.
So for me, my first thought was Ohio Department of Health. Go there. The letters from CMS. Go there. Go talk to those people. See if they have any kind of verification that they could give. Ask the questions. As you mentioned too, that really does help show what questions to ask. So it's really, as you've said before, it's a jumping point. So every single thing that they say needs to be verified by somebody else.
And you even spoke during the course of that story to a second anonymous source whose info never even made it into the piece, but who did back up that this paperwork is legitimate, it looks legitimate, and they've gotten similar, not this exact paperwork before, but that there had been issues prior. So there was corroborating information, is my point. Mm-hmm. It's a long way from, hey, I heard this. We don't deal in rumors.
Oh, no, absolutely not. For me, it made me feel most comfortable when I went to the Ohio Department of Health and asked for the exact letter to make sure that it's the same exact thing, nothing was changed. And once I saw that, I was like, wow, this is, okay, so this is legitimate. We can really move forward with this, put this story up, and figure out all the other information there.
Now, how do you do it fairly, knowing that Mercy is not likely to talk to you? So you reach out to Mercy, correct? So how's that play out?
Yeah, you have to reach out to them, because you have to give them a fair chance to give some kind of answer to it. So yeah, we reached out. I waited hours, to be honest with you, to get any kind of response from them on this story. But I wanted to make sure to have what they're saying on there, because if this is a problem, for example, in this, they're trying to have this Medicare accreditation fixed before any kind of concerns moving forward happen, and Medicare people can't go to the hospital. So you want to make sure to talk to them first to see if they have any kind of plan in action before moving forward with it, because if you just put it on air and say, oh, all this is happening, don't talk to Mercy Health, how are you supposed to know that there's any kind of plan to get out of that situation?
And just to refresh everybody's memory, what could happen if they lose Medicare accreditation is that they would not be able to legally accept Medicare patients, which is a significant chunk of any hospital's revenue. So it's a very serious threat. It also can be fixed, and they have a deadline that's still months away to fix some procedures. So there is not an immediate reason to think that this is going to happen to Mercy. It's simply the fact that they're being told that this could happen means they've got some work to do, and the public does have a right to know that. I wanted to ask about Mercy and how to reach out, what efforts were made to reach out to them, because I do think that sometimes there's a perception that if somebody doesn't look good in a story, that it's like a hit piece, that we're out to get somebody. And that could not be further from the truth. So we're not approaching Mercy, in some sort of tricky way, saying, hey, there's a story I'm working on, give me a call if you can. And then they don't, and you're like, they wouldn't comment. There's, that would be cheap, and that would be not journalism. No, this is starting early and doing a lot of due diligence. It's reaching out to their PR people, and it's also the president of Mercy Health Youngstown. We had her email address, and we reached out there. The PR people don't like that. They probably still don't like that, and if they're watching this, they don't like that we reached out because that's outside of proper channels. But people do need to understand the reason that we would try as hard as we could is because if somebody made the decision to ignore us, we would need to be able to say, listen, whatever work you're doing, we want to get that out there. So we reached out early and often, and we said what we had and what we intended to report and when we intended to report it, so that by the time it makes the air, they've had a fair chance to decide how much they do or do not want to say. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important for people to know, so that they don't think that it's, when you see these little half statements or no comments or they didn't return the call, that it seems like, you whacked them with this last minute. They absolutely know what's coming, in this case for a day and a half before it ever saw the air.
Something I think is also important to mention, you mentioned too about the Medicare accreditation, that would affect Medicare enrollees. Well, also, the Ohio Department of Health did say that they confirmed it would be Medicare and Medicaid because of Ohio law. So because that is the case, that's something that we made sure to verify before putting any of that in the story, because we didn't want to have any kind of panic over something like that as well. And I think that that's something that needs to be kind of thought about as well. You don't want to start putting out panic like, oh, this is definitely going to happen, because that's not even close to the truth in this situation.
Right. But the public wouldn't know about this at all if somebody hadn't originally said, hey, you should look into this.
Yes.
So that's one story. So now, Allie, for your story, you spoke initially, and I spoke to a teacher with grave concerns over one of their students. And their whole deal, and we've taken calls like this many, many times, where somebody says, I've reached out to such and such agency, I'm not hearing anything, I don't think they are doing anything, whatever the agency may be. And with some experience, we know that it's usually not that simple. There's not really any agency, whether it be Children's Services or anybody else, that's just kind of got a file that's really a trash can and they just sit there all day. But their response may not be what you expect it to be, and when it's the welfare of a child, and you care about that child, as any educator would, that's cause for great consternation.
Yeah.
So, Allie, and your web story really laid this out in great detail, and I would encourage anybody to go read that also, because what's on air, we're truncated for time,
Yes.
and so we got the message out there, but it's very easy to follow a very lengthy story about the, I won't say holes in the law, but rather just gray areas. So starting with the teacher you spoke to, did you get a sense it was hard for her to come forward?
Yes, definitely. She was very hesitant about talking to us, not necessarily even about talking to us off the record, but going on the record and talking about her concerns to a broader audience, because she was very concerned about losing her job. And I think that's really probably the number one concern that we see with people who want to be anonymous. It's professional consequences, because usually, like you said, it's somebody who has some kind of inside or firsthand information, or social consequences, ostracization, things like that. But yeah, she was very hesitant. She did not want us to say, obviously, what school she worked for, did not want us to say what county she lived in, where she made her report. She was hesitant to even come to the station and talk to us in person, because she was worried that somebody would see her car or her walking downtown. And, at some points I was a little frustrated, like, man, like, she's kind of paranoid, but you have to put yourself in that person's shoes, that this is a very serious thing. It can be scary to go to the media and trust them with your story, that they're not going to just take everything you say and then put it out there in a way that you don't want, or that exposes you. And so, we had to find balance between what was reasonable and what, was not going to impact the story in a negative way. So when it came to, her not wanting us to say the county that she lived in, looking at the story, the way that we were approaching it, it was becoming more of a broader, looking statewide at policy and how that impacts the process, as opposed to investigating a specific CSB. So I was like, you know what, if it makes her more comfortable talking, that's fine. We can just say she's in the Mahoning Valley. But, identifying details that, I didn't think would trace back to her, like the fact that she's a woman. Teaching is a very female predominant profession, and so I was like, I'm not going to worry too much about her gender and if that's going to make it obvious who she is and things like that. So yeah, there definitely was some hesitation on her part.
I can recall one, not one of these stories, but one time where we were speaking to somebody anonymously, and they showed up. We were using them in silhouette. We were not using their name. We were disguising their voice. And one of the people who was present for the shoot noticed that something as simple as the shape of their head might be identifiable based upon what their profession was, and so they lent them a hat. So we'll go to great lengths. But this is necessary because you figure, okay, as nervous as this one teacher was, they're not the only person who would have seen the child in question.
Right.
They're the only one reaching out. Everybody's afraid to come forward. And there's got to be a great degree of trust that we can build with them, and then we can impart to the audience. In the case of that particular story, it did start with, I'm very worried about this one particular kid. And here we are with, okay, well, everything's going to be confidential. I got to keep the source confidential. I can't know anything about a CSB case.
Right.
She did end up telling me some personal information that I could try to verify in this case. So I spent a little while just trying to track down court records to see if there was anything that might build a case for something specific. And then this teacher had to work with me and understand that I could not do what I initially thought we might be able to do. But I thought there was a broader issue, and to their credit, worked with me on that, leading up to finally being willing to do this interview. So what should people know if they think that there's just no way? I mean, I mentioned that there's other teachers who may have seen that kid. There's other people who may have seen the mercy paperwork, but they're not coming forward. And I suspect it's because they know it's confidential. They know they're up against whatever the monolith in their world is, and they think there's no point. What should they know about that?
They think there's no point. I mean, it's almost sad to hear that, because, I mean, these kinds of stories can only be explored if people do come forward. And I think I would just encourage people that even if we do end up in a situation where maybe there's nothing that we could do for this specific child, but by talking about the broader issues, it does put pressure on agencies to always do the best that they can. Not that they are not trying.
Certainly.
And we certainly don't even know if the CSB in question has actually acted on this kid's behalf. That was part of the framing of the story too, was this woman came to us and said, my CSB that I reported this child to is not doing anything. But we couldn't run with that story. We had to talk about her experience and how she felt moving through the process and explain why it was that she felt that way. And so, yeah, I guess I would just say that, there's a lot that we can do, even if it feels like we can't attack the specific case.
Because what it led us to was a story that showed, I mean, I certainly didn't know. I thought, if anything, CSB or Children's Protective Services, depending upon what county or part of the country you're in, have a reputation of being sometimes too aggressive. And that's really not it at all. They have to walk a balancing act that balances parental rights and the fact that some parenting styles you may find abhorrent, but are not crossing this line, but that line is blurry and gray, and they have to make these decisions and be reviewed. And so the line that struck me so much from the one expert was when I was doing some pre-work on the story, and he said that people think that the standard is the child okay? But the standard is the child okay enough? Okay enough to not intervene in this family, because keeping the family together is important. Parental rights are important, and all of this has to be balanced. And every time you make that decision, if you get it wrong, the consequences could be dire.
Right.
So the last area I want to touch on is, now we've talked a lot about building trust with these anonymous sources. But I want to circle back to what I said earlier on, which is that the audience doesn't know who these people are. So why should the audience trust us when we're using people that they don't know who they are or what their credentials are?
I think there's two reasons for that. One, we do everything we can to make sure that information is credible, like going to other sources. We don't just take the word of one person and run with it and put that on air. Like that's not journalism at all. So yeah, so we make sure that we put that information out there once we have everything verified. And second off, in a lot of these situations that we were talking about, you have to think about the other person's point of view. I mean, that's a difficult thing sometimes, to go out there and talk, you know, to the station and put that information out there. I mean, in a lot of situations, you know, they could be involved or something like that. Like, it's a big deal to do that. So I think the fact that they're willing to do that just show something there as well.
And I would add too, and this is something that can also apply to what people should know if they want to make an anonymous tip to us, is that a source may be anonymous in a finished product of an article, but they are not anonymous to us. And that may seem obvious, but I think it's important for people to really remember, we know who this teacher worked for. We know what school she worked at. We know what county she reported to. We know the name of the child or the parents of the child. Like, we know a lot of information, and we've worked to really dig into it and make sure that they are verifiable. So I think it's really, you know, viewers or readers have to put a little faith into us. I know that can be hard, but you know, it is important to trust that we know when a source is credible, and that we are going to do the due diligence to make sure they're credible, and not just some Joe Schmo off the street.
Right. Them saying it is not going to... I know anytime I've ever taken anybody who says that they want to remain anonymous, one of the first things that I think any of us are going to ask them is, okay, do you have documentation in any way of what you're saying? So that I can't think of a story that we've ever done that was just the anonymous source. They're the catalyst. But then it has to be backed up. There's got to be, whether it's documentation. I've had anonymous sources. I know you mentioned we know who they are. I've actually had some where I don't know who they are, but they were able to get me documentation that I could independently verify, so I never needed to know who they were. I needed to know that what they were giving me was solid.
Right.
But it will never just be their word. And the other distinction that I think is important for the audience to draw is that there is, I've noticed a trend largely in national media where they do something that is, and it's especially an online thing, I'll just call it lazy. They'll write articles that are based entirely on social media chatter. So-and-so is getting roasted for blank, yeah. Or if blank faces intense backlash after interview on, and you're just writing a story based on Facebook comments. That's also not news, and the commitment just has to be that what we do is real journalism, so discount that. It is okay to discount some things from outlets who are doing what appear to be cheap. That's not the work of it. So I guess the rededication that I always try and bring every day, and I know you guys do too, is we'll do the work and not just sort of sit there and doom scroll and then dash something off. It's cheap, it's easy, it's clickbait, it's not news.
The internet writing about itself is how I've seen it described, yes. And I think that's accurate.
Right. So look for those distinctions, because you'll know who everyone is that said something in one of those articles, but the value isn't there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else either of you guys want to add on the either the specific stories or the overall concept here?
I think my one thing would just be, in some stories like the one that I did, there is some information that it is really hard to verify, especially, as I talked about in my story, CSB cases are confidential. So there were things that I couldn't verify specifically that she was talking about with her specific case. And so in those situations, it becomes the framing that's more important, rather than focusing in on the specific situation, talking about how the feelings that it evoked and the process that she went through reflected something larger that we could verify by looking at the laws, looking at the procedures, and talking to more experts.
One other thing about that I just thought of while you were saying that is, okay, obviously CSB cases are confidential. Based on the information and the knowledge that we have that's not reportable, if something ever happened related to that child, we would know that there was a deeper story. We would know that somebody was raising red flags sooner, and we'd be able to go retrace those steps and figure out what went wrong if it did go wrong. So even the stuff that doesn't make the air can be valuable later on if there's more accountability to be had.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's important to just say anybody who is thinking about reaching out or has any kind of concerns, I mean, you can make a difference. You can reach out, talk to us, give us any kind of information possible. I mean, it's how we do our job a lot of times. So I think it's important to not be worried about that. Just, reach out if you do have any kind of concerns or something like that.
Absolutely. And also, if you think that we just run with whatever anybody calls and says, I don't even know what the ratio is for the number of anonymous callers that go nowhere are, but it's far greater than the ones that do have what they would need to rise to the level of being credible for a story.
Absolutely.
And you know what? That's part of the job too. So that's not to discourage anybody from calling, and it's not to discourage anybody from trying to raise any issue. We ask for your understanding and we ask for your trust. If you call with a tip that is not verifiable, it may not be a news story, but we'll do everything we can to verify it to see if it is. If you call with something that's a legal matter that we can't give you legal advice on and not something that's necessarily got broader news value, we may tell you that. None of this is to be discouraging or disparaging. It's simply that these are vetted very, very, very carefully, and it's without people like you coming forward with what you know. You're doing your part. You're doing your part as a member of your community, and you're helping us to help you to raise the game so that we're a better society, a better world, a better Mahoning Valley. With that, you can always reach us at 330-744-8821, news@wfmj.com, watchdog@wfmj.com. Please like and subscribe to our podcasts and this YouTube channel. And until next time, this has been the Outcue.